Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I have with us Dave Bulger, local lumberjack and overall good guy. He is an expert in all things AI. So imagine the combination of lumberjack meets AI. That's the conversation we're going to have. But Dave's been on before. He's talked a little bit about the basics of AI, of artificial intelligence for those who are trying to keep track. And what we were going to do was talk a little bit more about, well, there's a lot of artificial intelligence conversations happening right now. We've got some news out there that Google has issued a quote-unquote code red. And the question, as a huge Mountain Dew aficionado, code red means something very different to me than to normal people, if you will, which is not a good thing, just to be clear. But Google's announced that they're, I think this was today's news actually, that they have 20 different types of AI projects that they're going to release this year. And Sergey Brin and Larry are coming back on to actively okay projects. We're going to talk a little bit, maybe even about sentience and what that means, because one of the conversations I think you and I discussed this last time, Dave, which was, is Google going to go by the wayside? And I was genuinely worried about it as a Google stockholder. But what was kind of obvious, and the more I think about it, is this idea that it's not going to be as simple as that. Google's been very, very involved in the AI space, generalized AI space. And the truth is that they have just chosen not to release their technology, and ChatGPT-3 has forced their hand. So the question really is going to be more reputational issues, which is something we should absolutely talk about, even in the pharma context. But a combination of reputational issues and a combination of, is the world ready for what's about to be unleashed? So before we continue, Dave, do you want to introduce it?
Hi, yeah, I'm Dave Bulger. I'm founder of a little company called Tuzag. We do digital concierge programs for clients. So kind of the exact opposite of let ChatGPT build some stuff for you. We actually create worlds in which people can enter into conversations with a digital concierge to accelerate changes in behavior. I have a background in behavioral science, artificial intelligence, and I was a journalist by undergrad training.
And that's kind of interesting. You said a term that makes me want to explore that a little bit further. You talked about you create worlds, which takes us a little bit outside the AI space and really brings me squarely in the meta space. And I'm talking about metaverse because everyone's been talking about VR and AR. And Apple just announced, for example, that they're going to, depending on which news source you're reading, one says they're going to immediately release their augmented reality stuff. And then you have another set saying, oh no, they're going to delay their augmented reality stuff. So I don't know what's actually going to happen. Yeah. But Meta being Facebook, for those people who are trying to keep track of this, is saying that no, we believe that the future is virtual reality, not augmented reality. Dave, do you want to explain first of all what the difference between those two is, and maybe get a little bit into, does AI play a role in the AR VR space?
Oh yeah, well, if you think about the notion of, and let's take this to gaming, right? So, because the basic difference, the way we talk about AR versus VR, AR is Pokemon Go, right? So it's an overlay on top of a thing you're seeing, right? As opposed to virtual reality, which is supposedly immersive, right? So the difference between Ready Player One and Google Glass, right? So how immersive do you need to be? And I think the interesting opportunity for both is the notion of the non-player character, right? And think of for non-total nerds, the non-player character are the the folks, like if you were playing Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, they are the characters that the dungeon master plays so that you can be your 5th level mage, right? And so the value
I'm
of
sorry,
the game.
just to clarify, this was a non-nerdy version?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't know that I have a non-nerdy now that I think about it. But the opportunity, right, is and the fun in games, right? So pick your favorite, like Call of Duty or any of those. A lot of the fun is in how robust the computer generated characters are, right? So how much can you interact with them, right? You're going to see a lot of this come up now that The Last of Us is on HBO. And anyone who played the video game is now, we're basically watching all the cutscenes, and that's kind of cool. So our job, when we think of this as a digital concierge, what we're trying to do is build I use a lot of movie references, The Truman Show, right? So we're trying to figure out the boundaries. And instead of having a bunch of actors who have characters and basically are really good at improv to make Jim Carrey do things, we're trying to imbue our digital concierge with that, right? And from a behavior change standpoint, we're trying to say, how can we create an entity that you want to interact with that understands the basic principles of behavior change theory, right? And that understands, okay, based on your disposition, I need to take you in this direction, right? I need to turn extrinsic motivation, which is, hey, go interact with this concierge and we'll give you a $100 gift certificate, into, I want to interact with this concierge because it's helping me achieve a health outcome. So I can give you $10 to get you to refill your prescription, or I can help you understand why refilling your prescription is important based on your world. And so that's where we sort of take this, and where the notion of large language models spitting out content is kind of dangerous.
So I have a question about that, because so for those people who don't know, I do promotional review work. I have a program called Minos, and what we end up doing is medical, legal, regulatory review. I'm a pharmacist, I'm a lawyer, and I do pharmacist, lawyer, and I have a master's in quality assurance regulatory affairs. So I am a one-person MLR PRC team, and I provide that service for companies, and I actually use other people as well. But the point being, that sets off all kinds of bells in my head, because the bells it sets off in my head are, this is great if you are directing people to an on-label indication. Mm-hmm. How do you limit the off-label direction that this might go in? Specifically, you'll end up talking to someone who comes in. Let's say you have a medication, we'll call it Bozempic. And Bozempic apparently is a diabetic medication, but works incredibly well for weight loss. And you have, you're still considering whether you're going to go get approval for a drug that might in the future be known as Wegovy, because I'm really good at coming up with fake names. Yeah. But how do you, when you're using something like AI in the context of VR, in the context of AR, use behavioral science to direct people in the direction of, oh, we're only talking diabetes. There may be other adverse events or technically risks which are supposed to be balanced, and those risks may include weight loss. How do you ensure that conversation doesn't take place?
Well, you head it off at the pass, right? So, and this is the difference between building a world and populating a knowledge base with only content that is approved. Early in my career, I spent a lot of time with people like you, trying to get things through medical and legal review. And one of the things we realized was we can't allow the computer to say anything that hasn't been reviewed. Mm-hmm. We can certainly demonstrate that the computer is not going to say anything that's not in the knowledge base, right? And so the use case that you're talking about, we would have to write messaging around saying, I can only talk about Bozembic in I think I used your fake name correctly.
You did.
I can only talk about this in the context of diabetes. If you'd like to talk about it in the context of weight loss, I suggest you talk to your doctor. And then you restructure the conversation.
Which sounds great in theory, but here's the question. In reality, when to be truly useful and to be truly meaningful, you want these conversations to be fluid.
Sure.
And the moment you start saying things like, I can only talk about this, but if you really want to have true value, go talk to someone else. You add friction points at that point.
So I wouldn't approach it from the drug perspective to start with, right? So if you think about how you want to get somebody to change their behavior, you need to think about them and what the outcomes of changing the behavior are. All the pharmaceutical product is a tool for helping achieve a different goal. And so if you're structuring, again, just to use the Truman Show thing, if I'm trying to get Jim Carrey to better manage his diabetes, the context of all conversations around Bozembic are related to the diabetes, right? And the reason we think of this in terms of sort of almost a game engine for accelerating behavior change is I can keep the conversation in front of the digital concierge, right? So I am directing the conversation in the context of you. And if you start asking about, if we have designed into the game the ability to talk about weight loss, which is also important for people with type 2 diabetes, right? Let's talk about it in the context of what are the things you can do to better manage your weight. We don't have to mention the pharmaceutical. We should talk about, activities of daily living that can impact that, right? And so my job as the game designer is if you're going to start asking about off-label uses, I need to move the conversation off of talking about the pharmaceutical and other things in your life based on my understanding of your attitudes and behaviors that can help you with weight loss.
So, which takes us to this next point of the truth is Wegovy in this case is very, very good at understanding the risks and the benefits because you've programmed it. One of those risks is weight loss. If I come in saying I'm seeing an unexpected drop in weight, should Wegovy at that point automatically say talk to your doctor, or should it say that is an expected reaction to the use of Wegovy?
Absolutely. I would argue probably both. So one of the challenges we have in this whole notion of using, let's not call it artificial intelligence. Let's talk about it in terms of self-service.
Sure.
Right. So from a self-service perspective, I can carry on that conversation with you, but it's the right in terms of accountable care. I should also tell you, that's something. If it's concerning you, you should talk to your doctor about it. Because I would tell you that if you and I were having that conversation, and you said, "Oh, I'm getting worried about my weight loss," I can take you down a path to figure out why are you concerned about it, how much is the weight loss concern. Here are some things you might want to do about it. But, at a certain point, I need to pass you on to an expert member of the care team. Where we can use self-service, whether it's conversational AI or not, is to eliminate 90% of the conversations that a physician would have to have with you otherwise, right? So let's only focus your time with another human on things that other human is more credentialed for doing.
So I guess that brings to the next question, which is, who is the digital concierge expected to replace? Is it the sales rep or is it medical affairs? Because you would get very different answers depending on the answer to that question. So talk to me about, again, we're not talking about your specific product, but we're talking about just these tools as we continue. and you're
Yep.
developing them. And we know several different companies are creating versions of these tools.
Yeah, exactly.
The question is, who are we trying to replace? And is this the future? I mean, obviously I can see a future for sales reps to be augmented at the very minimum. Some might argue replaced, but I think it's too early for that. But but are we also looking at medical affairs in that scenario?
Yeah, so had you not provided options, my response would have been, I think we're supplementing the nurse.
The nurse where? Within the hospital?
In primary care.
Okay, got it.
Right? So if you think about relationships and where this use case would actually come from is my doctor has prescribed me this drug. I have questions about this drug. Normally I would pick up the phone and wait on hold for a long time. And then I would talk to a nurse.
Right.
Eventually, right? And I would ask that question. Well, again, of 10 calls a nurse is currently getting, 9 of them could have been answered without bothering the nurse.
Right.
Right. And one of the challenges in healthcare, especially in primary care, is humans don't scale.
Right.
And we don't have a cost model for that. So how do I ensure that 10 out of 10 calls are things that we needed to talk to the nurse about? And the way we do that is we allow for the patient to have an intermediary, right? So the self-service, if you will. And the way that we change behavior with that is we're building relationships in a virtual world with the patient for the patient's betterment and looking for times where we need to pass them to somebody with a license, right? Some of this is about liability. You're a lawyer. There's only so many things I'm willing to take on, right? For instance, in the course of a conversation, if someone mentions they're going to do harm to themselves or others, it is incumbent upon us to get them to a human fast. Not just because that's the right thing to do, but from a liability standpoint, it's just, there's not enough insurance to protect against that, right? Same thing goes with when we're talking about this from a patient care perspective, right? My background's generally in public health and that whole care team patient relationship, right? What we're trying to do is give people, as an industry, right? I think the right thing to do is to make sure that the professionals are only working to their license. And so that's where I think that, conversational AI has a huge play. Is there is an awful lot about moving the patient forward between visits that we can't staff with people. And so how do I help Darshan live his best life every day now that he's been given a new medication and he's trying to manage his diabetes and his caseload's huge, right? So like all of this stuff about your life, that's what we need to train the digital concierge to manage, right? And when we get to a point where we go, you know what, somebody with a medical degree needs to answer this question, it should be perfectly okay for us to warm transfer you to the clinic.
So I have several questions that came out of that. The first question that came out of that for me is this idea that you are using the system to augment the nurse, which means that you are using it in the clinic as opposed to on a pharma company's website. Is that fair?
Well, it depends on the point of action, right? So if and where your perspective is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say normally it might not be a nurse, but the actual primary care attendant, right? As opposed to if I'm doing this through the pharmaceutical company, I still also need to have that approach that this is about you and managing your disease in the context of wellness. My pill or my injectable is just a tool in your wellness. We fought this a lot. In a previous life, I did a lot of tailored patient support programs for the pharmaceutical industry. And one of the things that we had to make very, very clear, very, very continually is this ain't about you. It's about them. And so what we want to do is make treatment adherence part of a healthy day. not the reason for having the conversation. So it would be perfectly fine for a digital concierge to live on a pharmaceutical website, as long as the brand understands that this is about helping Darshan manage his type 2 diabetes. And my pill is only one piece of that.
So I have several comments about that. The first being, I love the idea of a digital concierge on a doctor's office website, for example.
Sure.
But I don't see it replacing my nurse. I don't see it replacing my doctor. And neither do you. I'm not suggesting you did.
Yeah.
But my point being, in that scenario, I'm really going, what time are you guys open? Do you guys accept my insurance? That's the level of questions I'm really going to ask it.
Yeah.
The question that comes out of that for me is, it's a specific use case, but doesn't get into the complexity of, I had this adverse event. And to the extent it does, let's say I personally don't, but I'm sure there are some people who go, I'm having a 15-pound weight loss from Wegovy. In that specific situation, you might very well say, if it's acute and came out of nowhere, go to the ER. So that'd be one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing might be, we need to connect you to a human being. We'll make an appointment with the doctor. Well, we need to connect you to a human being. So that'd be another point.
Yep.
The third one, and I think this is where it starts getting more complicated.
Sure.
Is we need to talk to your doctor. And the reason that gets complicated for me is that means that now I need to know who you are. Because we've got 15 doctors in the back. And now we've got privacy concerns that kick in. You take that to the nenext step and you go, okay, not only are we going to tell your doctor, we're going to put a note in your file saying 15-pound weight loss, which is not the worst thing in the world. But then instead of a 15-pound weight loss, if it said suicide risk, that creates all new questions and concerns, because the insurance company will point to that in the future and say, oh, no, this is this is additional liability, and we are going to use this to either hike this person's insurance premiums up or the like. So I guess and all of that because either the AI understood what I was saying but sort of took it to the nth level, or maybe possibly the AI didn't understand what I was saying, which makes things even more complicated. So how do you address that version of the problem, which is the privacy concerns, the downstream effects associated with it, and the like?
So permission marketing, I will lean on old school Seth Godin, right? So this is all about getting permission. So again, if I ask you, is it okay if we have a conversation? As long as I keep your data secure, there's no HIPAA issue, right? You said, yes, I want to talk about this. And now you're asking an ethical question, and I'm not an ethics professor, but
I am actually.
From a healthcare perspective, right? Just as a person who spent his career in public health, if I'm talking to you and you say, I'm thinking about killing myself, I have a moral and ethical responsibility to say that to someone. Liability be damned. My job is for you not to kill yourself. Right? Because we're at the end of the day, Dave doesn't want Darshan to hurt himself.
Sure. But is the responsibility I think that's great. Dave does not want Darshan to hurt himself, but does Dave have the right to tell the ER that Darshan is trying to hurt himself? Or should Dave limit himself to telling Darshan, call the ER, here's the phone number?
That's exactly the way we handle it in our world. Is we say, I think you should reach out to this person. Would you like me to transfer you now? Right. And if you say no, then we say, I think we should stop talking and you should go talk to someone. Who do you have to talk to? Right? We have in a lot of our programs, we have decision trees on these things that allow the concierge to try and diffuse situations like that, even though we don't do any suicide prevention work, but it comes up and you have to be ready for that, right? Severe adverse event reporting is an actual thing And it's like, we can ask if a client wanted us to do it, or a client wants anybody to do it. One of the things that the vendor should be asking is, what is your escalation protocol? Let me build it into the concierge so that we escalate this appropriately. If you'd like us to tie into Epic, we can tie into Epic and we can drop stuff in. If you need us to tie into the SAE database, happy to do it. But that becomes more of a business requirement for the concierge.
Which takes that next question, which is, if I say I had a 20-pound weight loss from this, is that now reportable under MedWatch to the FDA, to the pharma company, saying that this is the person, this is the reporter, this is when they reported, this is what the meds they were on, and therefore follow up with them? Or is that a violation? And this is sort of where I think it's sort of interesting.
Yeah.
And again, you're sort of connecting all these different pieces, because you're now saying, take a human being, give them unlimited time. And what I mean by unlimited time is all you're limited by is processing power.
Yep.
So you give them unlimited time to think through something that won't get emotionally charged.
Yep.
So I just gave you like 9 things you could do, which would be very, very beneficial in the larger scheme of things.
Absolutely.
But I'm trained as a lawyer, I'm trained as a pharmacist, and I can tell you I couldn't think of 4 of those things if I was on the phone with someone who said those exact same things to me. But what is the liability for a doctor's office, for a pharma company, for a ER, when or for the technology company, when you're prompted with, I took a medication, I had an adverse event? And how do you have that conversation? Do you simply go, we need you to first log in, so you create a friction point? Or do you go, I don't need you to log in, I simply need you to go to a chatbot that's easily accessible, but you'll be limited to what answers you can get?
Yep. Yeah. So this is interesting, right? Because this will sound way more flippant than I mean for it, but this is actually part of the architectural design of a concierge. Is you sit down with subject matter experts, and way too often no one brings the legal counsel in to go, look, how would you like this to be handled? Right? How would you like that? Well, we need to avoid this at all costs. Well, then we structure the architectural design to sort of ensure that we can't hear those things. Right. So that, a lot of this is bespoke, which gets us full circle to the last conversation of, you can't just hand this over to ChatGPT and done. Right. There's a lot of everything you're talking about can be distilled into an algorithm. And those algorithms are decision points on what to say next and where to direct the conversation. And so, it really becomes up to the designers of the concierge, how to manage those things. Because the goal here is to, first do no harm. And so how do we build that into the system in an operational way? Right? It may be for certain drugs that we just ask the patient, is it okay if we report this? And if they say no, then the concierge needs to back off.
Well, can it though? Or is there a legal requirement that you still report it?
Depends on what the client, I'll say this on behalf of every designer everywhere, not just me. Depends on what the client wants to do about it. And that's where we rely on people like you to help us understand what the guardrails are. Right? We can make the concierge do whatever you want it to do. We rely on you to help us understand where to set up the rails.
Which is easier said than done. And the reason it's easier said than done is because as a lawyer, one of the big advantages I have over, say, you or a doctor's office is I'm very clear who my client is.
Yeah.
I have a very clear duty to protect that company or that individual.
Yep.
So if I get hired to write a code to protect a pharma company, that's who my job, that's who I owe my duty to. But if you are designing, say, a bot, a digital concierge,
Sure,
and this digital concierge is going to come in and decide who to report things to,
yep,
that gets much murkier, because from if the patient is your client, privacy becomes really important.
absolutely.
If the doctor is your client, record retention and knowledge becomes much more important. If overall system is what you're looking at, then reportability becomes really, really important. Transparency becomes really, really important. And there's a natural tension between what the transparency requirements are and the privacy requirements of the patient. Who wins? And there's no right answer, because but that's my question. So when you are being hired, how do you decide that?
Yeah, so I can only speak from what I've done throughout my career is I come into this as a patient advocate.
Okay.
Like, we are here, the patient is the customer, not the product, right? Which we need more health plans to realize. But so I try to think of this in terms of, how is this going to help the patient? While also understanding from a client perspective, if we can all get on the same side of the table, we can figure out what the rules hierarchies are for managing these things, right? So, which is very different if it's a physician's group who wants to build a concierge. You're exactly right. Their worldview is different than if this was a pharmaceutical company. But the one thing we should all be agreeing on in the healthcare system is that this is for the betterment of the patient. So patient privacy.
I'm going to challenge you on that. Yeah, as weird as it sounds, I'm going to challenge you on that. Not because as a patient I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
But there is a public health aspect to this as well.
Sure.
So are we talking about the patient individually, or are we talking about patients in general?
Both. Right.
So different answer.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why we develop complex game systems, right? Yeah. Is how do you figure out, because again, a lot of this is, and I go back to permission marketing, right? A lot of this is about developing a sufficient relationship with the end user, in this case, the patient, so that we can provide them with appropriate counsel on how to leverage data. Setting aside the fact that HIPAA isn't really about privacy as much as everybody thinks it is, right? So it's about CYA for handling of data, right? So if I can sorry, that was editorial. I apologize. But I have an opinion or two.
Of course you do, and that's okay.
Yeah, but the notion of this in terms of saying, okay, Darshan, like, you just told me something that I should share. I won't if you don't want me to, but here's what I'm going to do with your information next. Is that okay with you? Right? That is tying Darshan to the information. The other way that you can handle, and this is specific patient to general patient, is I can also report back that a severe adverse event was reported. The concierge doesn't have to tell you which individual reported that. It's not a violation to say, in the course of 20 conversations today, 4 people came back with severe adverse events, and here they are. They did not provide us with permission to share their identity, but I want you to know that these 4 things came up today, right? So in that case, the reporting aspect of the concierge could be blinded or not blinded, depending on the permission granted by the individual.
And I think that's the question. I think the FDA, again, I'd have to look at the rules, but I think the FDA might have an issue with that. The FDA might say, you know who the person was. For example, they logged into their account, so identity was figured out. So it's not that you don't know who the person is, you choose not to tell me. And while I understand
on behalf of the reporter, and that's, I think, where folks like you come in.
Right.
and say, look, you got to phrase this so that they will give you permission.
Great. So again, we can keep going. One of the things I did want to discuss was how this plays out if it was being done by a pharma company, because there are, I know companies exploring that, but that sounds like a different conversation. So before we go, Dave, how can people reach you?
So we have a really short URL, weare2zag.com. All one word, we are Tuzag is Tuzag. If you hit it, we have info site there, or you can send something to info@weare2zag.com.
Awesome. And thank you again for coming on, Dave.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.